There we go. Thank you, Patrick. Thank you so much for the welcome and introduction, and just a little bit more as far as my background. As Patrick said, I'm a consultant and been in the field for a little bit. I'm actually based in Columbus, born and raised, and spent my entire career in Ohio. But I work all around the country, and I'm really thrilled to be working with Dade and Montgomery County. I've done a lot of work with Cleveland and Summit County and various parts of and communities around the state. So it's just a pleasure to be with you guys and to support this planning process. Patrick, as you said, our goal here is to get to priorities. And we'll talk in a moment about how we're going to kind of move rapidly to get as much input as possible to discern those priorities. And I'll spend a minute today just talking about the process. What we won't be doing, and just to be clear on this webinar, just to get us kicked off today, we won't be going into each of these briefs in terms of the content of the briefs. We really want to encourage you to spend some time with them directly and just thinking about the opportunities that are being presented, and then offering your input. So we don't want to color your input. We really want to get folks as much opportunity as possible to share your own insights and experience. What we're working towards in this process is, I would suggest, maybe an emerging way of thinking about how to better prevent and continually reduce and end homelessness for people experiencing it. And what you see here is a graphic that I borrowed from our folks up at the Canadian Homeless Hub. And it simply shows sort of the direction we're aiming for as a community, and every community and for the most part is working towards this same kind of rebalancing of our responses to people facing a housing crisis, which means we need to invest and spend more time building our prevention responses. And you'll see in the opportunity brief some discussion of how that's starting to take shape in different communities, including in Montgomery County, as Patrick shared. The work that Sarah and Aubrey are doing is kind of working to build up your prevention capabilities. But we also want to build up and improve and sort of make faster our rehousing supports and make them more robust and comprehensive. And if we do that, we are seeing time and again in different communities how we can reduce the need for crisis response if we focus on making sure homelessness is prevented whenever possible, or when it does occur, it's brief and rare. And that's what we are aiming for ultimately with every one of these opportunities, is lifting up and really focusing in on those opportunities that we think might drive us forward the fastest and have the greatest likelihood of success. So we're looking to lift up those ideas and opportunities through this process that get us towards or closer to this vision you see here. We have a rapid process. When I started talking with Patrick and Jessica and Amy and the whole team at Home Solutions, it was very clear that there's not much bandwidth to sit and plan, and there's a lot of interest and momentum and activity happening now, as you all are certainly aware, that we want to stay focused on, and we want to move towards 2026 with a bias towards action. And so we designed a process that keeps us going at a pretty fast clip and embraces sort of the knowledge base around the country, around the state, and mostly and most importantly around Montgomery County. And that's what we're trying to lift up here, is what do we already know? What do we already know works? What do we see as being impactful in other communities? And how can we focus in on those impactful strategies sooner rather than later, because we do not have time to waste. And so we designed a process that moves us quickly. We're already beyond or sort of moving beyond literally on this webinar, this initial research phase, which was sometimes or looking at these examples and lifting up and sort of curating opportunities from around the state, around the country, and some work even in Montgomery County, and distilling that into these briefs. So everyone can start with at least a very basic digest of what is really sort of moving the needle around the country and locally. So we've done that homework. We've digested those opportunities into briefs for folks to start to look at. Now, today, we're starting an input phase. This will happen between now and mid-October. As Patrick said, and I'll talk about here in a moment, we've designed interviews and focus groups, and we have a community survey that we'll be sharing here today, sort of issuing today, if you will, so we can make sure we're getting as much input as possible over the next 30 days. Our goal is to move fast, but we also want to be careful that we're tending to the local expertise and knowledge base, and making sure we're accounting for the amazing work and actions and the challenges and struggles that are current and present in Montgomery County as we figure out what are the most important, impactful, feasible things to do collectively in 2026. We'll gather input over the next few weeks. I'll share a little bit more about how we'll do that. And then we'll move into a feasibility phase where we'll take the input and we're going to go deeper on the priorities that seem to be most resonating with folks, that seem to really capture more energy than not and more interest than not. And we're going to examine those priorities that seem to be rising to the top in a more intensive way, to look at what would it cost to implement that priority, what are the near term, in other words, the next 12 months, what are the implementation steps we might take to effectuate those priorities and to make them a reality for Montgomery County, and put that together in terms of an assessment and set of recommendations that then can be presented to the Homeless Solutions Policy Board and for COC review and input later in November, just further sort of distilling that input. And then finally, we'll come back with formal finalized recommendations in January for the Home Solutions Policy Board and the COC to review and hopefully adopt if it resonates with everyone. And then we're immediately moving into implementation. What that looks like is going to depend on what priorities rise to the surface and are embraced by the community. But we do have an intention to move as quickly as possible and within our community's capabilities to implementation in the first quarter of next year. So let me just talk briefly about those 7 opportunities that, Patrick, you said we have kind of organized these briefs around. I'm not going to go into the content of those opportunities. That's not the purpose of our webinar today. It's to introduce these briefs and the process to everyone to make sure we're all familiar and can engage. You can find these briefs today, right now, on the Homeless Solutions website. The URL is listed here. You can also, if you have a smartphone, you can click on this QR code and immediately go to the landing page where you'll find these briefs. These briefs are organized in 2 formats. One is a singular document that includes all the briefs in one document with a table of contents. So if folks just want to sort of download that and review it at your leisure, that's one approach. The other format is we broke those briefs into individual documents. So if you just have an interest in one or a few of them, you can focus in on just the topics that are most interest to you. do encourage, and the process really is relying on folks familiarizing yourselves with what we've been able to capture and curate from around the country, and to most of all bring your own ideas and experience to the conversation as we move into this input phase. So what are we doing with the opportunity briefs, and what do we mean by opportunity? We be clear, the opportunity briefs, these digests are really just informational. They're not comprehensive. They're not meant to reflect everything there is under the sun that is amazing and awesome in our world. It's happening even in Montgomery County. We didn't want to write a book. In other words, we wanted to keep them brief, as we said, and we wanted to focus on those opportunities. As I mentioned, we sort of consider opportunities to be those collective impact strategies and actions we can take that materially and measurably move us towards a reduced experience of literal homelessness and a better response for people experiencing a housing crisis in our community. The typical way, as I think probably most of us now are familiar, that communities measure that is by looking at how many people experience homelessness over a year's time. And during our point in time counts, that's a good gauge. Are we making any headway? Are we going north or south on that? We also look at how quickly, for folks who cannot be prevented from coming into homelessness, how quickly we can help them access rehousing assistance and get back under permanent housing, a permanent housing roof, or a better and more appropriate housing arrangement than emergency shelter. So in other words, I like to say we're aiming for velocity. And so we're looking at opportunities that also help us more successfully and quickly connect people to the housing that makes sense for them, or the next step opportunity outside of our crisis response system. We are also, however, very aware, as we were talking and sort of developing this process plan and getting our thoughts together and gathering for this session today, it became clear to us as we were talking that we want to be very careful as we're talking about priority opportunities, that we're not discounting or ignoring or diminishing in any way the amazing work that's happening all around Montgomery County and Dayton and the full community, the continuum of care, which is a real spectrum of effort and work, from the direct supports we offer every day to people experiencing a housing crisis, and I would argue those amazing miracles that are happening daily, to the organizational efforts to improve facilities and to make better and to build in more partnerships with healthcare or workforce supports. There's any number of things that the community will continue to do and that are priorities and that need to continue and be improved, and will lift up sort of those macro or overarching priorities that we can also focus in on to really galvanize our effort, move the entire system forward. So it's a both and. We want to sort of embrace everything positive and supportive that's happening, while we're also zeroing in on those most impactful strategies. This is just to give you a sense of the opportunity brief focus areas. So as Patrick, you said, we have focused on 7 areas. These will probably look very familiar topically, hopefully, to folks. They're kind of the basic areas of programming and sort of system functioning, or backbone, if you will, functioning that homeless response systems tend to develop. And of course, beginning with coordinated entry, or more A fuller way of describing that is coordinated access to homelessness prevention and other homeless assistance. So how do we build up our front end of our system? I like to say, how do we build housing urgent care? And instead of just having housing emergency rooms and hospitals, how do we build urgent care and more primary means of engaging? So we talk about those opportunities around coordinated access, landlord engagement and management, of course, engaging our community partners who oftentimes are also very interested in helping our unhoused neighbors find stable housing. So opportunities in that regard. And then programmatically looking at street outreach opportunities, to continue to grow our access to services through street outreach and help people more rapidly move from unsheltered situations to house situations quickly, where everyone wins. Looking as well at emergency shelter and transitional housing and ways to continue to make sure those are available to our neighbors when they need emergency housing and transitional housing to move back into stable housing. And of course, permanent supportive housing for people who are disabled and oftentimes experiencing long-term homelessness, who need long-term supports to get back on their feet, to stabilize in housing, and to not fall back into homelessness. And programmatically, finally, rapid rehousing, which is more of a broadly available form of flexible rehousing assistance that serves many types of households and is a really important feature of our current homeless response system and always an area to continue to grow and improve. So you'll see opportunities around rapid rehousing. Finally, we talk about COC governance and improvement because it might feel a little bit more mundane, a little bit more behind the scenes, but it's also very critical to make sure that collectively we're working together efficiently with collective accountability, and we're always aiming to improve both performance-wise and qualitatively in terms of what we're offering our community members. The opportunity briefs are organized pretty simply in terms of the content by providing initially a summary of the opportunity, a digest, as I mentioned, a little bit of a curated list and a summary of different evidence and examples that are related to that opportunity. And finally, some potential initial implementation steps that are really just suggestive, the types of things that you might do next or put more focus on if this becomes the priority. So the opportunity briefs cover the bases in that regard. They are, again, they're brief, so you should not expect them to go terribly deep into any one of these areas, but it does give you a good flavor. So here's what we're going to do over the next 30 days. As I mentioned, we are in sort of a fast-paced process, and our goal is to engage as many people as possible and get as much input as possible. My job in supporting the process will be to take everyone's input and to digest that into a summary analysis for our Patrick and the team and for the policy board and the COC. But we have a lot of voices we want to make sure we're hearing from. So over the next 30 days, and much of this concentrated over the next few weeks, we're going to be interviewing many folks. Patrick and Amy and the team have invited different folks to engage in interviews, and we'll also be doing different focus groups next week with people with lived experience as well as frontline service staff across the areas you can see on the slide: coordinated entry, so shelter, transitional housing staff, and then rapid rehousing and permanent housing staff. In other words, we want to make sure we're hearing from a broad range of stakeholders, folks from everywhere from our community partners and our elected officials, our funders, our cross-sector partners, but also our organizational leaders and management staff and all the way down, and I would argue most importantly, hearing from people at the ground level who every day are in the thick of it, whether accessing services or providing the services. And oftentimes, and I will say, professionally and personally, as somebody who's been doing this, as Patrick said, for a few decades, every time I have a conversation or a focus group or an interview with somebody with lived experience or frontline staff, I am still learning something new. And I approach those conversations in that regard because we are learning every day how to better do our work, how better to support people and to move the needle. So we'll be engaging again in interviews and focus groups, but we also want to make sure we are hearing from, again, as many people as possible. So we've put together a very brief survey. And if you're happen to be in an interview or a focus group, you're also welcome to do the survey. We're not looking to be rigid here. We really want to give every opportunity for folks to lend your voice. That survey, the interviews, and the focus group questions, you get us, those are here. But if you want to pull up your phone and find the link to the survey and start it today, you're welcome to. Please review the opportunity briefs first before you do this survey, however. And we have given folks a few weeks up until Friday, October 3rd at 5 o'clock to take a few minutes to offer your input through the survey. Again, the questions we're going to be asking are pretty straightforward. You can see here, we want to make sure, first and foremost, did we miss anything in the brief that's really important that's happening today, or did we get something significantly wrong? And then focusing in on what are the opportunities you're seeing, whether in that brief or your own experience, that are the things you want to raise up and see us focus more time and attention and resources on. Are there resources or partnerships that we should be thinking about as we consider that opportunity? Things we should be accounting for in the feasibility stage? And then is there anything else we should be accounting for or recommendations you may have for helping us advance those opportunities? We want to make sure that we are, again, listening with kind of an open mind and making sure we're accounting for your experience. So take the opportunity briefs as they are, but mostly we want to hear from you and what you're seeing in your experience. And so you'll see our last question we will ask is, more of a magic wand question. If there's one thing you can change, what would that be and why? So we want to invite, in other words, you to think big and bold, to think realistically, but to think big and bold. The thing we talk about as we were putting together our plans for today and getting this process launched with you all, and a word I've come to really embrace, is the work we're talking about requires the extraordinary. And I mean that very specifically. In my entire career, I've never done anything or helped create anything that didn't require extraordinary work outside of my day-to-day work. And so I challenge all of us to think about the opportunities that we can roll up our sleeves on and put in the extraordinary time and effort it will take to do anything that's going to move the needle and make our community a healthier place for our neighbors. With that said, I'm going to pass it back to Patrick, who's going to wrap us up.
Thanks, Tom. I wanted to just thank you very much, and please share the link and information with other community partners that you guys have. Please be sure to read the briefs and give us your feedback on those. And again, we appreciate your time that you've shared with us. And we are going to end this with just some Q&A. So if anybody has any questions, you can feel free and ask those now.